What if the girl everyone laughed at was the last hope for their salvation? What if hunger wasn't her weakness, but the key to unlocking a power that could reshape the very fabric between worlds? Tonight, we dive into a story where prophecy meets desperation, where a beggar's plea becomes a battle for souls, and where the moon holds secrets that could either heal or destroy everything. This is the tale of Lyra, a girl who asked for nothing more than food, but discovered she was destined to devour darkness itself. If you're ready to witness transformation, betrayal, and a love that transcends the boundaries between human and beast, hit subscribe and let the hunger awaken. The tavern door creaked open like a dying breath, releasing a wave of warmth, laughter, and the intoxicating aroma of roasted meat that made Lyra's stomach clench with desperate need. She stood in the doorway for a heartbeat too long, her violet eyes scanning the crowded room filled with faces flushed from ale and comfort. The contrast struck her like a physical blow, their abundance against her emptiness, their certainty against her constant question mark of existence. Her fingers trembled as she pulled back her hood, revealing tangled auburn hair and cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. 3 days without food had carved her into something ethereal and haunting, like a wraith who'd forgotten how to be human. I can feel their stares already, she thought, forcing her spine straight, despite the weakness threatening to buckle her knees. But I've survived worse than judgment. I've survived everything except this hunger that feels like it's eating me from the inside out. The conversations died one by one, as patrons noticed her presence, their expressions shifting from curiosity to discomfort to outright disdain. She recognized the look, the way people's eyes would slide past her as if poverty were contagious, as if acknowledging her existence might somehow diminish their own good fortune. But tonight felt different. Tonight, something electric crawled beneath her skin, making the mark on her wrist burn with silver fire. Magnus, the tavern keeper, looked up from polishing a pewter mug, his weathered face creasing with practiced indifference. "We don't serve charity cases here, girl. Move along before you spoil my customers' appetites." His voice carried the weight of a man who'd learned to harden his heart against sob stories and desperate pleas. Behind him, conversations resumed, but Lyra could feel the undercurrent of attention, the way people pretended not to watch while hanging on every word. She took 3 careful steps forward, each one requiring more courage than the last, until she stood before the bar like a defendant before judgment. "I'm not asking for charity," Lyra said, her voice carrying a strange resonance that seemed to echo off the stone walls longer than it should have. The words surprised even her, steady when everything inside her shook, clear when she felt like dissolving into shadows. "I'm offering a trade, protection for your village, for 1 meal." The tavern fell silent again, but this time the quality of the silence had changed. It wasn't dismissive, it was pregnant with possibility and disbelief. Magnus set down his mug with deliberate slowness, his eyes narrowing as he studied her more carefully, perhaps noticing for the first time the way moonlight seemed to cling to her skin despite the indoor lighting. The laughter started as a low chuckle from a corner table, then spread like wildfire through the tavern until the air rang with cruel mirth. "Protection?" wheezed an old farmer, slapping his knee. "From what? You look like a strong wind could snap you in half." But Lyra remained perfectly still, watching their faces with an intensity that gradually began to unsettle those who met her gaze. There was something unsettling about the way she absorbed their mockery without flinching, as if she were cataloging each laugh, each sneer, storing them away for future reference. "They laugh because they've forgotten what real fear looks like," she thought, her fingers unconsciously tracing the mark on her wrist beneath her threadbare sleeve. "But I remember the sound of claws on stone, the smell of copper and moonlight, the way shadows can move when they're not supposed to." When the laughter finally died down, she spoke again, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "The wolves that have been hunting your livestock for months, the ones that took Henrik's prize bull last week, the ones that left claw marks on the Johansson farm door 3 nights ago." The specific details hit the room like ice water, sobering faces and straightening spines as people realized she knew things no stranger should know. From a table near the fireplace, a young man with honey-colored hair and intelligent green eyes leaned forward, his expression shifting from amusement to something approaching respect. Finn had been watching her since she entered, noting the way she moved despite her obvious weakness, like a predator conserving energy. like someone accustomed to surviving on instinct alone. "How do you know about the attacks?" he asked, his voice cutting through the murmurs of discomfort. There was no mockery in his tone, only genuine curiosity tinged with something that might have been hope. His grandmother had filled his childhood with stories of ancient protectors, of those who walked between worlds, and something about this strange girl sparked recognition in his blood. Lyra turned toward him, and for a moment their eyes met across the smoky tavern air. She saw kindness there, and wariness, but not the dismissive cruelty that had become so familiar. "Finally, someone who doesn't look at me like I'm already dead," she thought, feeling something loosen in her chest. A knot of loneliness she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. "Because I've been tracking them," she said simply, but the words carried weight, implying knowledge and experience far beyond her apparent age. "They're not ordinary wolves. They're bigger, smarter, and they hunt with purpose. They're looking for something specific, and I think I know what." Alara moved through the tavern like a ghost given form, her walking stick tapping a rhythm that seemed to sync with Lyra's heartbeat. The old woman's presence changed the very air in the room. Conversations died mid-sentence, and even the fire seemed to dim as she approached. Her milk-white eyes, clouded with age but somehow still piercing, fixed on Lyra with an intensity that made the young woman's skin prickle with electricity. "Grandmother," Finn whispered, rising from his chair with obvious concern, but Alara raised a weathered hand that commanded silence from everyone present. 67 years I've been waiting," Alara said, her voice carrying the weight of decades and the whisper of secrets long buried. 67 years since the night the sky bled silver, and the first compact was broken. She stopped just inches from Lyra, so close that the young woman could smell herbs and old magic clinging to her clothes like incense. The mark on Lyra's wrist began to burn with increasing intensity, responding to something ancient and powerful radiating from the old woman. "She knows," Lyra realized with a mixture of terror and relief. "She knows what I am, what I'm becoming, what I'm supposed to become." From across the tavern, Gareth the village protector stood abruptly, his chair scraping against stone with a sound like grinding teeth. He was a mountain of a man, scarred from years of failed hunts, his reputation built on dead wolves and living fear. "Enough of this madness," he growled, hand resting on the pommel of his silver-inlaid sword. "We don't need some half-starved girl's protection when we have steel and experience." But even as he spoke, his eyes kept drifting to the 3 parallel scars that ran from his left temple to his jaw, marks that had never properly healed, that ached with every full moon, that reminded him daily of an encounter he couldn't quite remember clearly. Alara's attention shifted to him with predatory focus. "Steel, Gareth? How has your steel served you against creatures that heal from wounds faster than you can make them? Against beasts that think like men but hunt like demons?" Her words hit him like physical blows, and Lyra watched his confidence crumble as memories he'd tried to suppress came flooding back. The old woman turned back to Lyra, reaching out with one gnarled finger to touch the spot where the mark burned beneath fabric. The moment skin met fabric, silver light blazed through the cloth, illuminating the tavern with ethereal radiance. "The seal of the primordials," Alara whispered, and even those who'd never heard the term felt its weight settle over them like a blessing and a curse combined. All these years of running, of hiding, of pretending I was just cursed instead of chosen, Lyra thought, feeling tears threaten for the first time in years. But if I accept this, if I become what the prophecy says I am, will there be anything left of me to love? Anything left that's still human? The question hung in her mind as Alara spoke the words that would change everything. "You were born to be the bridge between worlds, child. The question is, are you brave enough to burn down who you were, to become who you must be?" Gareth's world tilted, as suppressed memories crashed through the barriers he'd built in his mind. The hunt 3 months ago, the one where he'd lost 2 good men and barely escaped with his life, the creature that had seemed more shadow than flesh, moving with impossible speed through moonlight that turned its fur to liquid silver. The way it had looked at him with eyes that held too much intelligence, too much recognition, as if it knew him on a level deeper than sight. "No," he whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. The scars on his face began to burn as if freshly made, and he pressed his palm against them instinctively, feeling the unnatural heat that always accompanied his worst memories. Lyra moved toward him with careful steps, her newfound understanding making her see past his bluster to the broken man beneath. She could smell his fear now, acrid and sharp, mixed with something else she was only beginning to recognize, the lingering scent of otherworldly contact, of someone marked by creatures that shouldn't exist. "You've seen them up close," she said softly, and it wasn't a question. "The wolves that move like shadows, that seem to know your thoughts before you think them. They marked you because they wanted you to remember, wanted you to carry their message back to the village." How does she know? Gareth thought desperately, feeling the carefully constructed walls of his denial crumbling around him. How does she know about the dreams, about the voice that whispers in languages I don't understand, but somehow comprehend? He found himself nodding, despite every instinct screaming at him to deny, to maintain the illusion of normalcy that had been his only anchor to sanity. "They spoke to me," he admitted, the words feeling like broken glass in his throat. Not with words, but here. He pressed his fist against his chest, over his heart. "They said they were waiting for someone to come home." The tavern had gone cemetery quiet, every patron straining to hear words that might explain months of terror and sleepless nights. Magnus stepped forward, his face pale as moonlight, clutching a pewter mug so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "Waiting for who?" he asked, but his voice broke on the last word because somewhere deep in his father's heart, he already knew the answer. The son who'd disappeared during Gareth's first hunt, the boy they'd found no trace of despite days of searching, the child whose bedroom he still couldn't bear to enter. Lyra felt the connection snap into place with painful clarity, the web of loss and transformation that connected every person in this room to the darkness outside. Her mark pulsed with increasing intensity, and she could suddenly sense the supernatural signatures around her, like a sixth sense coming online. Gareth's scars, Magnus's grief, even Finn's latent power, all of it painted the air with colors only she could see. "They're not just hunting," she said, the words emerging with certainty that surprised her. "They're calling. And tonight, when the moon reaches its peak." She paused, feeling the truth settle over her like a mantle of terrible responsibility. "Tonight, everyone who's been taken will have the chance to choose, remain lost forever, or fight to find their way home." The bowl appeared before Lyra like an offering at an altar, steam carrying the rich scent of beef, potatoes, and herbs that made her mouth water so intensely it bordered on pain. But as she lifted the spoon with hands that shook from more than just hunger, she became aware of every eye in the tavern fixed upon her, watching for signs of what she truly was. The first taste exploded across her tongue with flavors so intense they brought tears to her eyes, not just from relief, but from the sudden rush of memories that food awakened. Her mother's cooking, her father's gentle laughter, warmth and safety and love she'd thought were lost forever. "How long has it been since anyone fed me without expecting something in return?" she wondered, feeling Magnus's grief mixing with her own gratitude in ways that made the food taste both sweet and bitter. He's not just feeding a stranger, he's feeding hope that his son might still be saved. With each spoonful, she felt strength returning to her limbs, but more than that, she felt her supernatural senses awakening like flowers blooming in fast forward. The emotions of everyone present became as tangible as the warmth of the fire, their fears and hopes creating a symphony only she could hear. She could sense Finn's growing protectiveness, a warmth that wrapped around her heart like a promise. Gareth's confusion and reluctant respect, sharp-edged but honest. Alara's ancient patience, deep as wells and twice as mysterious. And underneath it all, threading through the very foundations of the tavern, she felt the supernatural currents that flowed beneath this place like underground rivers. "This village," she said softly, pausing between bites, "it's built on a convergence point, isn't it? A place where the boundaries between worlds grow thin." Her violet eyes found Alara's clouded ones across the room. "That's why the wolves come here. That's why the transformations are possible. This entire place is sacred." Alara nodded slowly, a smile playing at the corners of her weathered lips. "Sacred, cursed, or blessed. Sometimes there's no difference, child. Your parents knew this when they brought you here as a baby, when they entrusted you to my care before." She paused, pain flickering across her features. "Before they made their choice to hunt the darkness that was hunting you." The words hit Lyra like a physical blow, nearly causing her to drop her spoon. Fragments of suppressed memories began surfacing, gentle hands tucking her into a makeshift bed, whispered promises that they would return, the taste of tears that weren't her own. She'd been so young when they disappeared that she'd convinced herself they'd simply abandoned her. But now, they didn't leave me because they didn't love me, she realized, the truth simultaneously healing old wounds and opening new ones. They left because loving me meant protecting me from something even worse than abandonment. As if responding to her emotional upheaval, the mark on her wrist blazed with silver fire so intense it shone through her sleeve like a beacon. Around the tavern, candles flickered in rhythm with her heartbeat, and the very air seemed to thicken with possibility. She finished the last of her meal and stood, feeling power coursing through her veins like liquid starlight, transforming weakness into strength and fear into purpose. The howl that pierced the night wasn't the sound of any earthly wolf. It carried harmonics that resonated in the bones, frequencies that spoke to something primal and forgotten in human DNA. Lyra's head snapped toward the sound with predatory precision, her pupils dilating until her violet eyes appeared almost black. The mark on her wrist erupted with such brilliant silver light that it illuminated the entire tavern, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. "They're not just coming," she whispered, her voice carrying an otherworldly echo that made everyone present shiver. "They're singing, calling to something inside me that's been sleeping for too long. I can hear them," she thought with dawning wonder and terror. Not just their voices, but their thoughts, their pain, their desperate hope. They're not monsters. They're prisoners, trapped between forms, caught between life and death, waiting for someone who can speak both languages. She pressed her palms against her temples as the psychic connection strengthened, flooding her mind with images that weren't her own, moonlit transformations that felt like dying and being reborn simultaneously. Human consciousness trapped in lupin bodies, endless nights of hunting not for food, but for the scent of home they could never quite reach. Finn stood abruptly, his chair clattering backward as instincts he didn't understand urged him toward action. "Lyra, what's happening to you?" he asked, moving closer despite the supernatural energy crackling around her like visible electricity. There was genuine concern in his voice, but also something deeper, a recognition that he couldn't quite name, as if some part of him had been waiting his entire life for this moment. His grandmother's stories suddenly felt less like fairy tales and more like prophecies, and the blood in his veins seemed to sing in harmony with whatever was awakening in the strange girl who'd stumbled into their lives. Around the tavern, patrons pressed themselves against walls and huddled in corners, but none attempted to flee. Fear held them, yes, but also fascination, the kind of terrible awe that comes from witnessing something that will be retold for generations. Lyra turned toward the window, her enhanced senses penetrating the darkness beyond glass and stone. "They're bringing someone," she said, her voice now carrying dual tones, her own and something far more ancient. "Someone they want me to see, to remember, to choose." She looked directly at Magnus, and her expression was filled with compassion that seemed too old for her young face. "Your son is with them, Magnus. He's still fighting to be human." The flashback hit Lyra with the violence of a physical assault, yanking her consciousness 18 years into the past. She was 3 years old again, hiding in a root cellar while sounds of battle raged above, not the clash of steel, but something far more primal and terrible. Through the wooden slats, she could see her parents moving with impossible grace and speed, their eyes blazing with the same silver fire that now burned in her own. They weren't fully human in that moment, but they weren't wolves either. They were something between, something that had learned to walk the line between worlds without losing themselves entirely. They were like me, she realized with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. They were guardians, protectors, bridges between the human and spirit worlds, and they died not because they were weak, but because they chose to save me instead of saving themselves. The memory sharpened, revealing details her 3-year-old mind had been too young to process. Her mother's final transformation, becoming something of pure silver light that held back a tide of darkness while her father carried Lyra to safety. They hadn't been killed by wolves. They had become something beyond wolves, beyond human, beyond the physical world entirely. In the present, Lyra's body convulsed as the suppressed memories integrated with her adult consciousness. Silver light bled from her skin like luminous sweat, and when she opened her eyes, they held depths that hadn't been there moments before, the accumulated wisdom and pain of 18 years of purposeful amnesia finally lifting. Finn reached for her instinctively, and when their skin touched, he gasped as images flooded his mind. Ancient compacts between species, guardians who protected the barriers between worlds, and a darkness that had been growing stronger with each passing generation. "The wolves outside," Lyra said, her voice now carrying the authority of inherited knowledge. "They're not the enemy. They're the victims of something much worse. A corruption that turns guardians into prisoners, that perverts the sacred bond between human and beast into something hungry and endless." She looked around the tavern with eyes that now saw past surfaces to the supernatural currents flowing beneath. "My parents didn't just protect me from wolves. They protected me from the thing that makes wolves into monsters, that turns protectors into predators. And now," she paused, feeling the weight of destiny settling over her like armor made of starlight and sorrow. "Now it's coming for all of us, and I'm the only one left who knows how to fight it." The transformation began in her bones, a deep ache that felt like growing too fast, like her skeleton was expanding to accommodate something larger than human anatomy could naturally contain. Lyra gripped the edge of the table as her spine elongated slightly, as her rib cage widened to house lungs that could process both earthly air and otherworldly essence. But the physical changes were nothing compared to the mental expansion. Suddenly, she could perceive layers of reality that had been invisible moments before, could see the strings of connection that linked every living thing in an intricate web of cause and effect. This is what they were so afraid of, she thought, as her consciousness expanded beyond the confines of her individual mind. Not the power itself, but losing myself in it, becoming so much more than human that I forget how to care about human things, human problems, human love. She could feel Finn's fear and fascination radiating from him in waves, could sense his struggle between wanting to comfort her and being terrified of what she was becoming. The knowledge that her transformation might cost her the one person who'd looked at her with kindness made her fight against the change, even as she knew fighting was futile. Her fingernails lengthened and sharpened, not into claws, but into something more elegant, silver talons that could cut through supernatural barriers as easily as physical ones. Her hearing expanded until she could detect conversations 3 villages away, until the heartbeat of every person in the tavern became a symphony she couldn't tune out. Most disorienting of all, her empathic abilities exploded outward, making her feel the emotions of everyone present as if they were her own. Magnus's desperate hope, Gareth's growing belief, Alara's ancient satisfaction, and underneath it all, the approaching pack's mixture of sorrow, rage, and desperate longing. "Lyra," Finn said, his voice cutting through the supernatural static in her head. She looked at him and saw not fear in his expression, but determination, the kind of resolve that accepts impossible circumstances and chooses love anyway. "Whatever you become, don't lose yourself completely. Some part of you needs to remember what it feels like to be human, to be you." His words anchored her to her core identity, just as the transformation threatened to wash away everything she'd ever been. Around them, the tavern's wooden beams creaked as supernatural energy pressed against the building's structure. And somewhere in the distance, the howling grew closer, more complex, more urgent. The first shadow to emerge from the tree line stood nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, its silver-touched fur rippling like mercury under moonlight. But it was the intelligence in its amber eyes that stole the breath from every throat. This was no animal driven by instinct, but a conscious being trapped in a form that no longer fit its soul. Behind it came 2 more, equally massive, equally aware, and as they approached the tavern, their synchronized movements spoke of military precision, of hunters who had learned to work as a unit through necessity and shared tragedy. "I know you," Lyra thought, as recognition slammed into her consciousness like a physical blow. The largest one, those scars along his muzzle, the way he favors his right foreleg. Papa? The psychic connection she'd felt earlier crystallized into devastating clarity. These weren't just transformed villagers. They were her family, her neighbors, everyone who'd tried to protect the boundary between worlds and paid the ultimate price. Through the supernatural link, she felt their trapped consciousness reaching out to her, their desperate hope that she might succeed where they had failed. Magnus pressed his face against the tavern window, his breath fogging the glass as he searched the approaching pack for familiar signs. "Thomas," he whispered, the name torn from his soul as he recognized the middle wolf, smaller than the others, with distinctive white markings on his chest that matched a birthmark his son had carried. "My boy, what did they do to you?" The wolf that had been Thomas turned toward the window at the sound of his father's voice, and for a moment, his lupine features shifted, becoming almost human in their expression of recognition and pain. The pack leader, Lyra's father, padded closer to the tavern door and began a low, complex vocalization that was part howl, part keening song, part prayer in a language that predated human speech. Through their connection, Lyra understood every nuance. "Daughter of our blood, child of prophecy, the time has come to choose. Will you break the chains that bind us to this half-existence, or will you take up the burden we could not bear and become the guardian this world needs?" The song was beautiful and terrible, carrying 18 years of trapped love, regret, and desperate hope. "They're not asking me to save them," Lyra realized as the truth hit her with crushing force. "They're asking me to choose between their freedom and everyone else's safety. The corruption that transformed them, it's still there, still spreading, and freeing them might mean unleashing it on the world." She placed her palm against the window, and through the glass, her father's great head turned toward her. In his eyes, she saw not just love, but understanding. He knew the choice he was asking her to make, knew it would cost her everything she wanted for the slim chance of saving everything she loved. The psychic bond between Lyra and the pack exploded into full communion as the moon reached its peak, flooding her consciousness with their shared memories and accumulated pain. She experienced firsthand the moment of each transformation, the choice her parents had made to accept corruption rather than let darkness loose upon the world, the agonizing years of fighting to maintain their humanity while trapped in bestial forms, the growing fear that their sacrifice might have been in vain. But underneath their suffering, she sensed something else, a deep well of power that had been building for 18 years, waiting for someone with the right bloodline and training to channel it. "There's a third option," she realized with dawning certainty that felt like the sun rising in her soul. The prophecy wasn't about choosing between redemption and destruction. It was about transcending the choice entirely, about becoming something new, something that can hold both light and darkness without being corrupted by either. The mark on her wrist began to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, and she felt her consciousness expanding beyond the confines of individual identity, touching something vast and ancient that had been waiting in the spaces between worlds. Finn moved to stand beside her, and when she looked at him, she saw not the fear she expected, but unwavering trust that cut through her supernatural detachment like an anchor to humanity. "Whatever you're planning," he said quietly, "you don't have to do it alone. My grandmother filled my childhood with stories about guardians who worked in pairs, who balanced each other's power and shared each other's burdens." As if responding to his words, a mark began to appear on his wrist, not identical to hers, but complementary, like two halves of a cosmic equation finally coming together. Around them, the tavern began to change as Lyra's power reached critical mass. The wooden beams glowed with soft light. The stone foundation hummed with harmonic frequencies, and the very air became thick with potential energy that made breathing feel like swallowing lightning. Outside, the pack pressed closer to the building, their forms beginning to shimmer and shift as the barrier between their human and wolf natures started to dissolve. "The transformation ritual," Alara said from her corner, her voice carrying the weight of forbidden knowledge. "It requires a willing vessel, someone strong enough to contain both the light of redemption and the weight of every soul that needs saving. But child," her clouded eyes fixed on Lyra with devastating clarity, "no one has ever attempted it and remained entirely human afterward." The ancient words came to Lyra's lips without conscious thought, syllables in a language that predated human civilization flowing from her tongue like musical incantation. Each word she spoke rewrote the laws of physics within the tavern's walls, transforming the humble building into a nexus where multiple realities could coexist. The wooden floor beneath her feet began to glow with intricate patterns, symbols that chronicled the history of every guardian who had ever walked between worlds, every soul who had sacrificed their humanity for the greater good. "I call upon the compact of blood and starlight," she intoned, her voice harmonizing with itself in impossible ways. The covenant between flesh and spirit, the sacred duty that binds protector to protected across all realms and all time. This isn't just about saving the pack, she realized as cosmic understanding flooded her consciousness. This is about reweaving the fundamental relationship between human and supernatural, about creating a new kind of guardian who can protect both worlds without losing themselves to either. Through the psychic link, she felt her father's amazement and terror. He recognized the ritual from the oldest stories, the forbidden knowledge that previous generations had deemed too dangerous to attempt. But 18 years of accumulated suffering had taught them all that some risks were worth taking when the alternative was eternal imprisonment. Finn stepped forward without hesitation, his own mark blazing to life as he added his power to hers. The moment their energies intertwined, the ritual's scope expanded exponentially. What had been a desperate attempt at salvation became something approaching divine intervention. "Together," he said, his voice steady despite the cosmic forces swirling around them. "We can hold more than either could alone. Your power to transform, my power to anchor, your connection to the supernatural, my connection to the human." Their joined hands became the focal point for energies that made the tavern walls translucent, revealing layers of reality that existed in the same space but different dimensions. Outside, the pack began to keen in harmonies that shattered glass 3 villages away, their voices joining the ritual song as their forms started to shift and flow like liquid silver. Magnus pressed against the window, tears streaming down his face as he watched his son's wolf shape begin to flicker between forms. Sometimes beast, sometimes human, sometimes something transcendent that combined the best of both. "Is he coming back to me?" Magnus whispered, but Lyra shook her head, her expression filled with compassion that seemed to encompass centuries of understanding. "Better," she replied, her voice echoing with otherworldly authority. "He's becoming everything he was meant to be. Guardian, protector, bridge between worlds, and still your son at the deepest level that matters." The transformation that overtook Lyra transcended anything the world had seen in 1,000 years. Her human form became a vessel for starlight made manifest, her body shifting between solid flesh and luminous energy as she learned to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions. She was still recognizably herself, the same violet eyes, the same determined expression. But now she radiated power that made the air around her shimmer with possibility. Her consciousness expanded to encompass not just the tavern, not just the village, but the entire network of supernatural currents that flowed beneath the mundane world like cosmic bloodstream. "I can see everything," she marveled, her awareness touching the consciousness of every supernatural being within 100 miles. Every trapped soul, every corrupted guardian, every place where the barriers between worlds have worn thin, and I can heal them, not by destroying what they've become, but by helping them become what they were always meant to evolve into. Her power reached out like gentle hands, touching the consciousness of each pack member and offering them a choice, not between human and wolf, but between remaining trapped in limitation or embracing a new form of existence that honored both aspects of their nature. Finn's own transformation was subtler, but no less profound. While Lyra became a bridge between worlds, he became an anchor to humanity, his consciousness expanding just enough to match hers, while retaining the emotional connections that would keep them both grounded in compassion and love. Together, they formed a perfect circuit of power and wisdom, transcendence and humanity, infinite possibility tempered by mortal understanding. "We're not losing ourselves," he said with wonder, watching as his hands gained their own soft luminescence. "We're finding out who we really are underneath all the limitations we thought were permanent." One by one, the pack members outside began their own transformations, not back to their original human forms, but into something new that combined the best aspects of both natures. Thomas the wolf stood on hind legs that lengthened and strengthened, his lupine grace merging with human intelligence as he became something that could protect both the wild places and the civilized ones. Lyra's father underwent the most dramatic change, his massive wolf form flowing like mercury until he stood as something between man and legend. Tall, silver-eyed, radiating the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of protecting others at the cost of himself. "My daughter," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that spoke to both human ears and supernatural senses. "You have given us more than freedom. You have given us purpose that doesn't require sacrifice." The restoration began with Magnus's son, Thomas, whose new form settled into something magnificent, retaining the wolf's enhanced senses and strength while regaining human speech and thought. But more than that, he became something that could guard the boundaries between worlds without losing himself to either side. As he embraced his father for the first time in months, their reunion sparked a cascade of similar transformations throughout the pack. Each member found their own unique balance between human and supernatural, becoming guardians who could protect both worlds from the corruption that had once claimed them. This is what the prophecy truly meant, Lyra realized as she watched families reuniting across the spectrum of the possible. Not the return of what was lost, but the birth of what was meant to be. Protectors who don't have to choose between their humanity and their power, who can serve both worlds without being torn apart by the contradiction. Through her expanded consciousness, she felt the ripple effects spreading outward like cosmic waves. Other trapped souls across the continent responding to the call, ancient corruptions beginning to heal, barriers between worlds strengthening rather than weakening as proper guardians took their places. Magnus wept openly as he held his transformed son, seeing not loss, but profound evolution in Thomas's luminous eyes. "You're still my boy," he whispered, running weathered hands through hair that now carried threads of silver starlight. "But you're also something more, something that can protect others from losing what we almost lost." Around them, the other reunions played out with similar mixtures of joy and wonder. Parents recognizing children despite their transformed states, lovers finding each other across the gap between human and supernatural, friends discovering that true connection transcended physical form. Ilara moved through the gathering with tears streaming down her ancient cheeks, touching each transformed guardian with hands that trembled with relief and vindication. 67 years I waited, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. 67 years I kept the stories alive, kept the hope burning that someone would find the third path, not human, not beast, but something that honors both. She turned to Lyra with expression that mixed grandmother's pride with prophet's satisfaction. "You didn't just save them, child. You evolved them. You gave them the gift of becoming who they were always meant to be, if the world had been brave enough to let them." Lyra raised her hands, and her voice carried the authority of someone who had touched the cosmic order and found her place within it. "The old ways failed because they demanded too much sacrifice from too few," she declared, her words resonating through both physical and spiritual dimensions. "The new compact will be different. Shared responsibility, mutual protection, and the understanding that guardians serve best when they remain connected to both worlds they protect." Her father stepped forward, his transformed presence radiating the wisdom of someone who had learned the cost of the old methods, and knelt before his daughter in recognition of her new role as bridge between all worlds. "This isn't about ruling or commanding," Lyra thought as she felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling around her like a cloak woven from starlight and possibility. "It's about creating a network of protectors who can guard the boundaries without losing themselves to the duty, about making sure no one else has to choose between love and service, between humanity and power." Through her connection to the supernatural currents, she began weaving new patterns of protection around the village, not barriers that kept the supernatural out, but filters that allowed beneficial magic while blocking corruption and malevolent forces. Magnus stepped forward, his face transformed by wonder and purpose. "My tavern," he said, his voice carrying new strength. "Let it become a sanctuary for those who need healing, for guardians who need rest, for anyone caught between worlds who needs a place to find their balance." The offer resonated through the supernatural community like a bell struck in perfect harmony, and Lyra felt responses coming from transformed beings across the continent, former werewolves, displaced spirits, half-blood children who had never known where they belonged, all recognizing the call of sanctuary and protection. Gareth approached more hesitantly, his scarred face reflecting internal struggle, but when he spoke, his words carried conviction born from hard-won understanding. "I spent months failing to protect this village with steel and conventional weapons," he admitted, his hand unconsciously touching the supernatural scars that marked him. "Let me serve as guardian of this sanctuary, as protector of those who come seeking healing and guidance. My failures taught me humility. Let them also teach me wisdom." Lyra smiled and touched his scars with fingers that radiated healing energy, not erasing them, but transforming them into marks of honor rather than shame. The cosmic energies swirling around them began to settle into new patterns, and Lyra felt the full weight of what she had become pressing against her consciousness, like an ocean trying to fit into a teacup. I can feel everything now, she realized with a mixture of awe and terror. Every supernatural being, every place where worlds touch, every moment when someone chooses between light and darkness. How do I stay myself when I'm connected to so much? The answer came not from her own understanding, but from Finn's steadying presence beside her, his consciousness serving as an anchor that kept her tethered to individual human experience, even as her awareness expanded to cosmic proportions. The transformation comes with a price, Finn said, his voice carrying new harmonics that spoke to both human and supernatural senses. We can never go back to being simply human, can never pretend the supernatural world doesn't exist, or that it's someone else's responsibility to protect it. His own mark pulsed with silver light that complemented Lyra's, creating a pattern that suggested partnership rather than hierarchy. But we also gained something unprecedented, the ability to serve as bridges, to help others navigate the spaces between worlds without losing themselves in the process. Alara approached them with eyes that now held flecks of the same silver light, her connection to the ancient knowledge allowing her to perceive the full scope of what they had accomplished. The old guardians were solitary creatures, she explained, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated wisdom, doomed to bear their burdens alone until the isolation either corrupted them or drove them mad. But you two have created something new, a partnership that allows the sharing of both power and responsibility, the kind of connection that makes transformation sustainable rather than destructive. Lyra looked around the tavern, seeing it now through her enhanced perception as a nexus point where multiple streams of possibility converged. This place will become a training ground, she said, understanding flowing through her like revelation. A place where others who carry supernatural potential can learn to embrace their gifts without losing their humanity. She turned to Finn, seeing not just the young man who had believed in her, but her partner in the cosmic dance of protection and service that stretched ahead of them through decades and centuries yet to come. As the immediate transformation settled into its new patterns, Lyra's cosmic awareness brought her a revelation that struck like lightning through her expanded consciousness. The corruption that had trapped the Guardians hadn't been random. It had been a test, a cosmic examination designed to determine whether humanity was ready for the next phase of supernatural evolution. We were never meant to choose between human and supernatural, she realized with dawning wonder. We were meant to prove that the two could coexist, could strengthen each other rather than existing in eternal conflict. Through the network of supernatural connections that now radiated from the village like a web of silver light, she felt other sleeping powers beginning to stir across the world. Ancient guardians who had hidden themselves away in despair were sensing the change and cautiously emerging from their self-imposed exile. Sacred sites that had been dormant for centuries were reactivating, their protective barriers strengthening in response to the new paradigm of cooperation rather than conflict. This is just the beginning, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that touched every supernatural being within 1,000 miles. The foundation for a world where protection doesn't require sacrifice, where service doesn't demand the loss of self. Finn squeezed her hand as his own expanded awareness showed him glimpses of what was coming, not just the immediate work of establishing the sanctuary, but the decades of careful diplomacy that would be required to help both human and supernatural communities adapt to this new reality. There will be resistance, he said pragmatically, his enhanced empathy allowing him to feel the fear and suspicion that change always generated. Humans who see supernatural beings as threats, supernatural beings who see humans as invaders, those on both sides who profit from conflict and separation. Lyra nodded, but her expression held the serene confidence of someone who had touched the cosmic order and found her place within it. Let them resist, she said, her voice carrying echoes of her father's authority and her mother's compassion. We won't force change. We'll simply exist as living proof that another way is possible. Every person we help, every guardian we train, every moment of peaceful coexistence will add to the evidence that cooperation serves everyone better than conflict. She looked around the tavern one final time, seeing it not as it was but as it would become, a beacon of hope that would draw seekers from across the world, a place where the impossible became everyday reality. 3 months had passed since the night that changed everything, and the village had transformed into something unprecedented in human history. a place where supernatural and mundane coexisted in harmony. Lyra walked through the early morning streets, her enhanced senses allowing her to perceive the invisible threads of connection that now bound the community together. She could feel Thomas helping his father prepare breakfast for refugees from the supernatural community, his wolf-enhanced senses allowing him to detect ingredients at a molecular level, while his human intelligence created new recipes. Gareth was training a group of young people, both human and transformed, in the arts of protection and diplomacy, teaching them that true strength came from understanding rather than domination. I used to think power meant being strong enough to survive alone, she reflected, as she paused at the edge of the village to watch the sunrise paint the sky in impossible colors. But real power, the kind that changes worlds, comes from connection, from being willing to share both burden and joy with others who choose to walk the same path. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of the sanctuary coming to life, conversations in a dozen languages, some of them predating human civilization, all of them focused on the work of building bridges between worlds that had been separated for too long. Finn emerged from the tavern carrying 2 cups of tea, steam rising from the liquid in patterns that seemed almost like writing in an ancient script. "Morning briefing," he said with a smile that carried both human warmth and supernatural awareness. "We have 3 new arrivals. A displaced dragon who's been hiding in human form for decades, a family of Selkies whose coastal home was destroyed by pollution, and a young woman who just discovered she can speak to the spirits of electronic devices." The variety of their guests had expanded as word of the sanctuary spread, bringing challenges and opportunities neither of them had imagined when they first joined hands to transform the world. As they sat together watching the sun rise over their impossible community, Lyra felt a deep contentment that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with purpose. "We asked if I could drive the wolves away for food," she remembered with a laugh that carried notes of silver light. "And instead, I discovered that the wolves were never the enemy. They were family waiting to come home." Finn's hand found hers, their joined consciousness creating a moment of perfect understanding that needed no words. In the distance, new travelers were approaching the sanctuary, some seeking healing, others offering service, all drawn by the promise of a place where being different was not just accepted, but celebrated as a gift to be shared with the world. In a world where impossible has become every day, where love transcends the boundaries between species and realms, Lyra and Finn continue their work as guardians of the impossible, proving daily that the greatest magic isn't the power to destroy, but the courage to create something entirely new.